It's our last week. All right, Sacred Pleasure, Sex, Myth, and the Politics of the Body. This is our fourth and final session on this amazing, amazing book. And as I've mentioned before, the book is huge. Digesting it in a matter of weeks is impossible. So I highly recommend reading it if you haven't read it. Creating a book group with a couple of friends also can be a really fun way to go through this material because it is not only so rich, it's very activating, right? So as you're reading this material, it's very likely that you'll start having insights about your own life. You'll start having things that come up, stories that come up. You'll recontextualize parts of your past in a totally different way. So having friends and colleagues that you can actually digest that with, having some kind of like book group / process group can be really, really useful for this kind of material. I've tried to offer some amount of that, but as I've mentioned before, there's just no way to get to everything, and it's really, really worth a read. Let's see here. Oops. Okay, so just as I like to do a little bit of review, we have, in week 1, we did an introduction to Riane and to me. We took a look at the domination partnership social scale as the foundation of this theory and this lens for looking at social relations at every size. So we're also talking about the micro and the macro systems. The domination partnership social scale is a way that we can look at our interior lives just as simply and just as clearly as we can then examine political systems, systems of higher education, all these other aspects of civilization and culture. Oh, and we have somebody else coming in. Great. Thank you, Donna. Week 2, we talked a little bit about nonlinearity. That's one of the delightful peculiarities of how Riane really, not only how she thinks, but how she has to teach her work, because her whole project is one of connecting the dots between parts of our lives that have been siloed and separated and fragmented. And the work of connecting those dots is inherently a nonlinear process. So it takes a moment to just sort of expand into that kind of constellation thinking and allow the information and allow the theory to wash over you a bit, because as it washes over you again and again and again, you'll have new insights, you'll connect new dots. And so that's that aspect of nonlinearity. And we also talked about unpredictability as one of Timothy Snyder's emerging 5 forms of freedom work that he's doing. And I actually think that these two thinkers come together really beautifully in terms of, he hasn't quite gotten around to the partnership model, but he does emphasize the importance of the first 5 years of life. He does emphasize neuroscience as it relates to the history of authoritarianism in Eastern Europe, which is his specialty. And yeah, we did a little exercise on taking in the good, group reflections, grab bag. Week 2 was much more of a getting to know each other and having more of a participatory feel. In week 3, we talked about our relationship with the sacred. I found the group conversation around this really powerful, really interesting. Exploring our relationship to holy language. A lot of people reflected that holy language is difficult for them, that there's a resistance there, that it triggers some things from their past, or there are words like sin or Lord that are just so loaded from domination, religion from their past, they just can't use that anymore and they need other language. Also, we sort of talked about how some of the spiritual revolution of the last 50 years has had a lot of domination backlash and domination resurgence within it. And so we're also looking at how even these partnership trends and these revolutions in consciousness do contain within them the seed for domination to come right back in if we're not careful and if we're not really aware of what's happening. So language of self-realization and language of love and compassion, all of these languages can be weaponized and co-opted to bring back domination patterns that are essentially simply an abuse of power. And obviously, that's something that a lot of us have in our religious heritage and background, as well as possibly in our family systems. And we're going to talk about that as well. The conflation of coercion and care, as Riane puts it, is an enormous aspect of how domination systems are maintained over time. And they go in disguise like that. And yeah, so talk, and then domination and partnership, sexuality, spirituality, and the dynamics of pleasure and pain. We went through those slides. We did a little bit of looking at some art, looking at some sacred imagery, reflecting on that. I have a little bit of information for you about the Minoan fresco. People were wanting to know about the skin tone, so we'll get to that in a second. And we concluded with a discussion of trance and trance states and its dual role, the tool of trance being a potential chalice or blade, essentially, in the imagery that we're working with, that trance states can easily be weaponized by bad actors to support domination systems and to get people to buy in to authoritarian regimes and cults of every size. Meanwhile, also, of course, trance functions as our gateway to the sublime, our gateway to connection, the altered state of consciousness we might experience in a concert or a dance performance or a really great piece of live theater or a really great sermon or religious experience. Those experiences of trance also do bring us together. They give us this experience of community. So it's something that unfortunately I think we've had to get really guarded about because there are so many mental predators out there on the loose. The internet age has been incredibly fertile ground for mental manipulators and mental predators. And necessarily people have become very guarded about trance states, but it is also very good medicine when it's used properly. And then we had a little bit of homework, which was, if this feels safe, if this feels good, explore an altered state of consciousness, a mild state of trance, something involving maybe music or drumming or painting or anything that gets you into that zone. So as I often do, I actually wanted to start off with a little bit of feedback and discussion, hearing how it went for you guys, if anybody actually did that homework on their own and what it brought up for them.
Do you want to stop screen sharing while we?
Sure, I can do
that. I could share something. I work as a storyteller, and I was at a workshop. I tell traditional folk tales, and I was at a workshop that was talking about how people have been grading in and out their personal experiences and a story that is, a folk tale or some fictional work. And I realized I can't do that because when I tell a story, I go really, really deep inside the story. And if I were jumping in and out, it would be really disruptive for me. And the place I belong is deep inside of the story that I'm telling.
Storytelling is a tradition of absolutely trance induction that goes way, way back. And yeah, that's an absolutely beautiful reflection. You really have to stay completely inside of it. One, for yourself, for your own sense of solidity in that moment, but also for the artistry of creating that reality for everyone who's listening. It's beautiful.
I can share something. I didn't even remember that part of the homework because I was just so like full of things to write about and reflect on just from the discussion, and I didn't even notice that homework. But I do that kind of thing as a regular practice anyway. And so I do, one of the practices that I work with is, it's called either 4-element tambourine or sacred tambourine. And I also do like mantra and vocal toning with that at times. And anyway, at the present time, that's very private practice for me. It's just something that I do on my own because it helps me go really deep and just sort of like rebalance and reset. And I just have had a wonderful opportunity recently where someone who is a significant teacher in that style of tambourine connected with me, and we're talking about mentoring, and there's like this responsibility that she has to pass on these teachings from her teacher, and I feel a responsibility to help that stay alive in the world, because it's very much connected to the same I don't know, cultures and spiritual practice that Riane's actually talking about. It's like the spiritual practice of that women used coming out of that time. And so anyway, it's a really strange thing for me to navigate that responsibility of trying to figure out, how do I pass this, like share this with others, but still like, you know, where's the line on what's personal and sacred to me? And then like, what part of that am I sharing? How do I do that? So I've had a whole ton of reflections about that.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, and one of the things that comes up when you're talking about sacred drumming, sacred tambourine, those rhythmic practices, is how often our rituals of coming together, creating partnership bonds, creating community through trance have had to go underground, right, in order to survive. All of these sacred practices have had to be secularized in order to survive and thrive right now. And also there's that big question of, what is appropriation, right? What can I really call mine? And I know that you brought that up before, and all of those questions around how do we claim our sacred rights? How do we claim our right to the sacred, right? To flip it around and respect those traditions, and also exist in this highly secularized situation where people even get a whiff of something having to do with spirituality and they really want to back away. And how we embrace more people in that without watering it down. Those are very, very important questions.
Yeah. Can I add a follow-up thought?
Please, absolutely.
Yeah. So one other piece of that is that the related experience I have so far with facilitating drum programs comes out of sort of a scientific model of like, what are the health benefits of this, you know, like, and I know that it's calling from cultural traditions that are rooted in spirituality, but the way that it's like kind of talked about so that it's like accessible to a general public is through more of like a research in science and like neuroscience lens. And that's a really strange thing for me to navigate too, because I see value in that. And I feel like, am I actually like sneaking something spiritual in here and not being transparent, you know? And so.
These are very rich questions, and I'd hate to rob you of them. Besides which, I obviously don't have answers. You're going to be muddling through that as you explore your teaching practice, and it's really wonderful that you're asking all those things. So, anyone else? Kimball, I see you about to, yes, hi.
Hi, I didn't put a hand up. It's the breeze. I have no idea even how to put it down. Yes, I do this actually quite regularly with client work, and because it's Zoom, one of the ways I find that I bridge the Zoom connection and phone is through somatic practice during sessions. And the big trance that we have is sleep, I think, in one way. And that's very disturbed with the people that I work with. So I did sort of like a double idea of a trance, that they're waking up in like 3 o'clock in the morning and can't get back to sleep. And I've created it, I took it away from the body scan, which there was just something that irked me. And then I realized that I turned it into a body visit. And I say, where's you're coming to a friend's house that you haven't visited for a little while. And they close their eyes, sort of, kind of, I call it the samurai gaze. And I do it with them at the same time. But at the same time, they're telling me, so I'm entering into their image and their visualization. And where would be the front door? What color door do you have? And then they'll say color, and so they're starting to create it out of something that they do know, a door. And then it's where is your front door of your body? And it's very interesting to find out where people would like to enter into their body. and it's all different places. And the same person won't have always the same one, and that surprises them too. And then I expand it, and that's the mutuality of it, because I do know a bit about, for example, the lungs and stuff like that through various difficulties. And so I describe it, and they say maybe one was entering in the head, and the sinus, and wanted to skip her nose because she didn't like her nose. I said, poor nose. Wow, such a beautiful, it's doing a beautiful job. So every place, like you would do when you walk into somebody's home, is that you would compliment it, make you welcome your welcoming. And that's the way to enter into the body. I have never found anybody with any difficulty doing this. This one really works, and it bridges. And I enter in, but then I'll describe the lungs or something and open it up. And so then I can add to theirs. It sounds like it's very helpful even in the future for them. Mm-hmm. Body image, thank the nose, even if you don't like your nose, it's doing a great job, maybe I don't like that staircase, but gets me upstairs and downstairs. And that trance of gratitude and thanking one's body.
Absolutely.
Inside, from the inside.
Absolutely. And I think maybe part of the resistance to the body scan is that it still can treat the body as an object, and that it's not, yes, you're recentering on the feeling sense, but if somebody is already really alienated from their body and stuck in a place of passive observer a lot of the time because of whatever traumas they've been through, whatever they needed to get safe from by leaving their body, that often becomes a habit for us, right? And so simply scanning your body or taking a practice of observing it can actually, I think, probably add to that feeling of alienation for some people, or add to that sense that their body is an object that takes them from meeting to meeting, but otherwise it's something alien to them.
Well, thank you for the vocabulary on that, because when I present it as a workshop, maybe with the group that I work with, that's the kind of vocabulary that I would like to have. I just felt it. It was just like, and I've been through so many scans, and it's like, no, guys, I really don't want a ray passing up and down me like this in my own. So you're absolutely right. This alienation, this object, and the compassion is missing with a scan.
It sounds like the first gesture is one from the heart of acceptance and coming to you. I love the image of a friend. Shakhtari, I wanted to recognize your hand coming up. Hi.
There we go. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I've been in and out through all these meetings. I wanted to just jump on what Kimball was saying, because it was just lovely. And I often try to do something similar to that. Not only going deeply within all of my being, but even I get to the point where I start thanking all my molecules. And then I expand it almost every night before I go to sleep. I expand it into my home, and I acknowledge all of the earth that is present here in my space. That the wood is still wood. It's still a tree. It's just serving a different purpose too. And I'm, with deep gratitude, I thank it. But all of what I find, and even in the human body, and I know that the science behind it is expanding to the point where scientists are saying that not even 50% of the human body is human, which is just wonderful, because when you come from a whole systems viewpoint, we're starting to finally acknowledge that, even within our own body.
Yes, absolutely.
And so when you do that when I do that within my house and within my yard and so forth, I can't find the boundaries anymore. There are no boundaries. There's just, the air I breathe has been on this planet forever, and it's been in and out of zillions of beings. including the trees, including, all the plants. There's the water too. I mean, the wholeness of it is complete. So thank you, Kimball, for bringing me back to that thought right now.
This is so lovely. See, this is exactly why it's not all about me, right? This is what we call a partnership kind of teaching. Everybody else's reflections are feeding each other's thoughts and really lifting up the level of thinking and the level of awareness and the depth of bringing this new perspective in. So I just really love where this is going. And Francesca, I want to recognize your hand, and then we are going to move on to the rest of the program. Oh, you got to unmute yourself, darling.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a breath with everything that I'm hearing. Just take that in and in the nose and twice as long out the mouth. And one of the things in studying shamanic practices, tantric practices, Taoist practices, and diaphragmatic breathing and the ventral vagal breath is that they're actually all so similar. And that sense of breathing in the nose, expanding the diaphragm and the belly, breathing out the mouth, really emptying the belly and the diaphragm, that this breath shifts me, shifts my clients, shifts people that I'm with out of the dorsal or sympathetic into the ventral vagal, where not only there's a sense of collaboration and creativity and flexibility, but it's in that place of really relaxing that I expand into the quantum field, that I expand into blink, that capacity to bring in information beyond what I consciously know. And so for me, it's any of those moments. It could even be in a massage, a long bath. It could be between sleeping and waking. It could be ecstatic dance. It could be just in deep breathing, that something, that the gears shift. I'm no longer in fight, flight, freeze, dissociation. What's happening? Huh? What'd you say? And I'm in a place where that inspiration starts to arise. And in that place, my favorite prayer is, take me, take my life. May my life be in service of wholeness on earth. And then I listen. I listen for that sense of inspiration or invitation that's arising. And that's that moment where I'll feel like I'll get an idea to call somebody, or an idea to write something, or an agenda for a new class or something. And sometimes I wonder, who me? Like, who me to bring this class, this idea, this book, this whatever into the world? And then it's, kind of like, who not you? And then I say, but I'm nervous, I'm scared. The parts of me that are little are like, am I going to be hit, hurt, rejected, made fun of? And I almost feel like I hear a voice that says, have more faith. And I'm like, have more faith? Don't I have enough faith? And my primary identity, even though I'm clinical sexologist and other things, my primary identity is actually priestess. Like, if you could only choose one identity, like mother, teacher, this, that, drummer, and you only had to choose one, I realized for me it's priestess. And the voice says, are you a priestess or aren't you? I am. So then have more faith. All right. And then I take the leap. Yeah.
That was absolutely beautiful. And I saw some hearts and some clapping. So thank you, Francesca. And full disclosure, I go through that every week before we get together. I go through that feeling of, who me? Am I ready for this? All of that, I completely relate. I go through that too. And also, I just wanted to mention that everybody's description of these trance states being so wholesome and so holy and so grounding and embodying and healing in all these wonderful ways. And I also Kimball's reflection that sleep is our big trance, and that for many, many, many of us, it is disturbed, right? We can see that people are starving for healthy trance states, and that does make them, again, more vulnerable to predation. And often victims are so frequently asked, why did you stay that long? Or how did you fall for that? Or how did you get into that in the first place? And I really do think that part of it is that this starvation for healthy trance. And then when a predator comes along and makes a trance state available to us and makes a group available to us that lifts up that trance state, it feels so good. We lose our wariness, which is part of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to dissolve those barriers. And unfortunately, the result often is it does make us more vulnerable. And so having compassion for people who fall prey to that is also really important right now, because like I said, we're becoming more and more aware of mental predation in all of its forms, and people are coming out and speaking out about their experiences, and they're not being met with the level of compassion and understanding that they really need. Right, so coming back here, thank you everybody for your reflections. Everybody also keep your eye on the chat. Some people are saying some interesting things in there that might be useful for you, and I'm going to read them as it feels appropriate, and otherwise just everybody else, so keep an eye on that. Okay, so not to be a downer, but I did want to focus back in on maintaining factors of domination systems. And just really getting into the mechanism of how all this works in the human psyche. So essentially a domination system is maintained by pain, right? But that happens on a number of levels, and that happens in a number of ways. One thing that we've learned about human neurology and psychology in recent years is that essentially when it comes to our nervous system, physical pain is indistinguishable from emotional pain. We experience emotional pain as a physical event, and our nervous system experiences emotional pain as a physical event. This can help explain why somebody who's lost their spouse might suddenly die of a heart attack. People literally do die of a broken heart, and these metaphors are more than mere poetry. They speak to the actuality of how our body processes emotional pain. It processes it as physical pain. So this can also help explain why the fear of social loss can help people maintain internal and maintain their role in external domination systems. When it seems like, well, you weren't going to die, no one was going to kill you. Well, actually, something was going to die. Something felt like it might die. Something in me felt like it might die. And that's just as real for us on a nervous system level, on a biopsychosocial level. The threat of social loss and social exile is sometimes even more real than the threat of physical pain. So pain and fear of pain is essentially the maintaining force for domination hierarchies and domination structures. Most often that comes in the form of punishment. We are punished for the behavior that might otherwise disrupt the system. So we are punished for questioning authority if that authority is authoritarian. We are punished for expressing our sexuality if we're living in a society that considers sexuality demonic, sinful, evil, loose, or otherwise unacceptable. So all of the ways in which we are punished can also help us understand the ways that we've been trained to accept punishment in trade of belonging, right? So that we've learned to accept and ultimately try to avoid punishment in order to earn and keep belonging. The conflation of coercion and care. There's a beautiful section in the book here about Chinese foot binding practices and mother-daughter relationships. And of course, the metaphor expands, right? The foot binding itself is this excruciating, horrifying, gruesome ritual. And it is culturally specific, but we can draw from it a metaphor for how mothers hand down to their daughters the rules of staying an economically viable asset. Right. So really, these mothers in their own way were trying to express love for their children. I mean, except for the ones that were naturally enjoying inflicting pain. That's 1 or 2% of people. But otherwise, mothers forced into this position of punishing or otherwise harming their daughters, they're doing it to essentially keep them alive, to try to preserve them, to try to keep them as an economically viable asset, right? So that someone who can take care of them will marry them. But this is a perfect example of what we mean by the conflation of coercion and care. When somebody takes out a belt and says, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, that's a conflation of coercion and care. Spare the rod, spoil the child. That's a conflation of coercion and care. When we learn that the people who are hurting us are doing it because we love us, it creates a primary confusion that can take the rest of the lifetime to sort out. And many people never actually quite get there. I'm just going to catch up on the chat a little bit because I see that it's, oh, yes. And Kimball says, today we have female genital mutilation. Yes, we have that all over the world. And we even have it encroaching here. People are getting labiaplasties to have their labia look more like the adult film stars' labias. And, and people actually have died from those procedures, from bleeding out after those procedures because it's such a vascular area. But it's done in the hope that they will become more sexually desirable and that and they won't suffer an emotional loss. And Francesca says, I was told I had to suffer for beauty and that my face was my fortune. Yes, many, many, many women grow up with this if they happen to be beautiful. If they don't happen to be beautiful, your face is your ill fortune. And that's the end of the story, right? Okay, so conflation of coercion and care. Right. So when I'm talking about a primary confusion, in order to survive in a family of origin that conflates coercion and care, you have to ultimately deny your own pain. You have to ultimately learn to pretend it's not happening, or to pretend that that person didn't hurt you, or it didn't hurt that bad, or what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? That's not always the case. Sometimes what doesn't kill you leaves you with everlasting scars and injuries that you'll never actually completely heal from. But we have these phrases that make us think, oh yeah, pain is good. No pain, no gain, right? In the bodybuilding culture and even in the hustle culture, no pain, no gain. So when we grow up in a domination-oriented family system, we are taught to practice denial in order to survive, to maintain our place in the family, to not be orphaned or somehow otherwise exiled or punished, to maintain whatever benefits we are getting in the system, which is sort of a natural urge. A child is not going to say, I can do better elsewhere. They can't. They don't have options like that. And so there's a kind of learned helplessness that comes in when we grow up in these systems, and also a very, very strong force of denial. And that's where I think an enormous amount of the psychotherapeutic tradition of the last 60, 70 years has made some headway. It's helped people understand that their families of origin may have caused them a great deal of pain, and to really take a look at and pick apart the ways in which they suffered in their families of origin that otherwise they might have tried to deny or minimize until whatever happened to make them realize they needed therapy happened, right? But that's not the end of the work. That's really only the beginning of the work. And sadly, a lot of psychotherapy sort of stops at insight, stops at realizing that your parents hurt you, and that's why you still behave in this way, or realizing that you grew up in this society with these intersections of oppression, and that's why you behave in this way. But insight doesn't heal. It helps us understand, and hopefully it helps us have compassion for the people who acted that way, but it doesn't ultimately help us heal. So all of these function as interconnected and supporting mechanisms in the interior life to produce and maintain the domination trance, as Riane calls it, or the feeling that this is just the way life is. And of course, this intersects with all the other 4 cornerstones. Once the child goes out into the world and discovers an economic system that rewards greed and mendacity and punishes generosity and a feeling for fellow man, they think, oh, well, this is just the way life is, and I have to play this way, or I won't be able to pay my rent. they go out into the world and they look at the sexual marketplace. And maybe if they don't think that they have the skills to connect with another person, they become a member of the red pill incel movement and decide that their sexual entitlement is a permanent source of grievance. So these domination trances come in various forms, but essentially it boils down to, this is just the way it is. This is the way people are. This is how we're wired to be. And there's only ever going to be a few people I can trust, and even those people will probably betray me. On the other hand, how do we maintain a system of partnership, or what we're calling partnership? And it's a completely different aspect. Now, it's not to say that there isn't pleasure in a domination system, but often that pleasure is, shall we say, a bit perverse. Often the pleasure allowed to us in a domination system comes from being a victor, being a conqueror, degrading or humiliating other people, being praised for perhaps our accomplishments that are also still participating in a domination hierarchy, perhaps say in finance or in other forms of business. We might get pleasure from our accomplishments, but that also requires an element of denial in terms of what those accomplishments mean for other people in our immediate system and also globally. Whereas in a partnership system, pleasure is the fundamental maintaining factor, and that comes in many forms. It's a self-reinforcing mechanism. Some of you might have experienced this if you ever tried to get into a new exercise program or a new meditation practice, or if you ever tried to do something really nice for yourself that didn't come naturally to begin with. There comes a time in those practices, if you really stick with it, that it becomes self-reinforcing. There's a sense that I get something out of this and I'm going to keep doing it, even if it's unpleasant at first, even if the first 5 minutes of cardio are still really tough, or even if the first 5 minutes of sitting in meditation is still really challenging. There's a self-reinforcing loop that comes in because it really does feel like a form of self-nurturance. Okay, I'm going to save that question for in a minute. So pleasure and accomplishments. We feel rewarded for actually doing a good job. And that good job feels aligned with our integrity, with our value system. What we're doing in the world doesn't require denial, right? In order to feel proud of it. Pleasure in caring for others and self. Riane frequently brings up the studies that have shown that starting as children and through the lifespan, our brains light up more, as she says, when we share and care than when we win and dominate. So actually, if we're going to be talking about human nature, right, or how we're biologically programmed, technically speaking, we are more hot-wired for a partnership system than for a domination system. That's why a domination system requires all these mechanisms to maintain itself. It requires constant vigilance to maintain itself, because left to our own devices and without constant fear of pain, harassment, or exile, we would naturally find more pleasure in caring for ourselves and each other and our natural environment than in destroying ourselves, each other, and our natural environment. Let's just get through this slide, and then I see that there's questions and comments. So we're just going to do that first. So obviously taking pleasure in art, dance, music, poetry, pleasure in worship and communities of worship, pleasure in sharing what we have rather than hoarding our resources for a false sense of security. Pleasure in receiving from others, right? I interviewed a number of women studying their sexual histories through this lens. And I have to say, one of the biggest struggles for women is simply receiving pleasure. And if in their story they met a partner that took more pleasure in pleasuring them than in pleasuring themselves, it created a whole new paradigm that was actually really challenging for them sometimes. To be met in bed by a partner who was more interested in getting you off flipped the script for them so much. that they were forced into a state of vulnerability that made them honestly afraid or anxious a lot of the time. Hopefully they got over it. Again, pleasure is a nicely self-reinforcing loop. So there's every chance that if you actually find yourself in that situation and it is foreign and alien and strange, you'll learn to enjoy it because it's very enjoyable, right? It's naturally enjoyable. But at first it was alien and frankly, anxiety producing for a lot of these women. So pleasure functions as a kind of currency that we exchange with each other when we live partnership values such as generosity, compassion, nurturance, appropriate discipline, and respect. So in a partnership system, it's also important to notice that respect goes both ways. It's not top down, it's not, or bottom up, I should say. It's not only the people on the bottom respecting, which means fearing the person at the top, but respect is something that's given mutually based on shared values and observed behavior. Accountability, ethical action, consensual and satisfying sexual relations, availability to wonder and awe. These, when we're living these values, are what give us a real and genuine sense of pleasure, and that reinforces the system. And the role of a god or divinity can be part of a complete and complex life in the world. It's not about a dictator or a rule book or anticipating punishment for bad action. The body is holy, the world is holy, and we act well and wisely, not out of fear of punishment, but because we take pleasure in good life. And now I'm going to open it up. So let me just return to the chat for a minute. Yes, I grew up with a twin brother, and the difference between our cans and can'ts were extremely apparent every single day. Yes, the double standard. I imagine that's a very good way to be educated in the double standard, having a twin of another gender. That would do it. Very similar for me with my two brothers and myself. Yes. Doesn't this gender differentiation mirror the whole society's valuing of males over females, patriarchy, domination culture? How painful to have it played out right in your family in that way. Yes, Elizabeth, exactly. Exactly. So the ranking, so the division of what is male and what is female, arbitrary and socially conditioned, first of all, and then the ranking of those categories as better and worse, higher and lower, and meant to, for example, in the Mormon church, meant to hold the priesthood and meant to be a mother, right? And I could list any number of other examples. I'm not only trying to pick on Mormons, but any time that you see a system in which one gender or a race of people are not allowed to be ordained and hold the priesthood, that is a giant red flag that you have a domination system. And there's a lot of apologetics that will happen around that. But for me, it's pretty simple. Ooh, fascinating, fascinating question. So question about how sex work fits in this paradigm. Francesca said, it depends on the type of sex work. I've studied this. Yeah, no, we could do a whole hour on that. I did want to come back to Shakhtari, who wanted to mention something, and then we're going to keep moving along.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I write books, and one of the things that in one of the books that I was looking at was, why does a person, when you're helping someone out, why does the person who's helping actually get more out of the experience than the person who's receiving? And what eventually I arrived at is the person who is helping is getting to experience their own best self also. So it's really a double gift to them. And it's when you look at it that way, it explains a lot of our behavior in the world. And how we have developed this philanthropic thing. I mean, aside from the economy of that, but the whole concept of philanthropy. But again, getting back to just that point, the person who is giving is actually receiving more.
Well, or receiving different, right? Because
Yes.
the person
Yes.
who is being helped definitely needs the help that they are receiving, and hopefully they're not carrying shame for being in that state of need. That's also another complicating factor when you're
I was going to say that's
when you're receiving
more
help.
complex.
and society has taught you that needing help is shameful, that's probably
That's-
going to dim your neurology a little bit, right?
That's right. That's part
But
of it.
I played a game with my baby nephew when he was tiny, and it was sort of the giving game, and we just had an object that we kept giving to each other over and over. And I'll tell you, both of our brains were lighting right up. And so I do think, though, that there's an aspect of the domination system enacting in our brains when we're looking at those studies, that in a different kind of social system with a different kind of perspective on what it means to need help, we might see more of a balance. I don't know, but we might see more of a balance and a deeper pleasure in receiving that help, because it is a gift and it is grace, and receiving grace is deeply pleasurable. So just to visit very briefly the question on sex work, I know, Francesca, you probably have a lot to say on this topic. We don't quite have space for that tonight. But I'm going to agree with what she's put in the chat, that it does actually really depend on she says the type of sex work. I would say the setting, the legality around it, all of the social structures around sex work really can change whether or not it's something that's happening in a domination system or something that's happening to further partnership. There is an amazing book called The Sacred Prostitute that talks about our long history of using sexuality essentially as a force of civilization, and I recommend it. It's a great read. It's from a while back. My mother had it on her bookshelf, and I inherited it when she died, and it's worth looking at. It might help change perspective on sex work, because we've definitely been sold a narrative that sex work is always degrading, that it's always dehumanizing, that these people are victims. That's simply not always the case, but it is sometimes the case. And that's the big difference. Let's see here. Francesca, just briefly, if there's something you want to add, I welcome it. I just am really trying to be conscious of the time.
Really great. Maybe we could do something just on that at some point. Yes, the what is it culturally in terms of the empowerment, in terms of the sociocultural laws, and also where the sex worker herself is coming from. So is this something that she or he or they experience as a have to, no choice, or is this something that they're actually choosing as an art form, as a healing form, as a self-expression, is part of that difference as well.
And also, I just want to plug a recent film if you haven't seen it. Emma Thompson's recent work, Good Luck to You, Leo Grand, is amazing, really worth watching. And it definitely deals with that whole question of how to think about sex work in the context of somebody actually choosing it because they're good at it and they enjoy it. And it challenges Emma Thompson's character to totally rethink all of that, because also she happens to be hiring this person and she never thought she would do something like that. Really worth watching. So thank you everybody for your comments. We are going to try to stay a little bit more focused now, and because there's an exercise I want to try to guide us through if we have time. So the connection to authoritarianism, I promised this in the blurb for the class, and we're only just now getting around to it. So authoritarianism and other forms of political domination have their roots in domination systems in the family life. And again, we mentioned this last week. This is why the regressive elements of our society made big investments on returning to traditional family values. And I put it with big bunny quotes, traditional family values. Once we had the sexual revolution and birth control and all of these things were coming out to actually empower women and free them from motherhood if that wasn't their choice, and also the ability to divorce someone, the ability to have your own checking account or credit card, all of these things were allowing women to feel their own power and to actually function as an economic force. And the backlash was extreme, and it was very well coordinated, and it targeted the family because they knew it was a 30-year investment, and then they'd have adults that would vote for them. And that's what happened. So in a domination-oriented family system, you'll see a lot of secret keeping. You'll see sex as taboo. You'll see a lack of information about sex. People who are, and we have to have compassion for some parents. It's really uncomfortable to talk to their kids about sex, but we also see legislation criminalizing sex education, criminalizing talking to children about what is a natural part of our human experience, not to mention also a socially conditioned part of our human experience. So when there's something in a society that is necessary for the world to be peopled, as Shakespeare put it, and we're not allowed to learn about it, that's a big red flag that somebody wants to control you, and this is a domination element in the system. So controlling reproductive freedom obviously also factors into setting up and maintaining a domination system for generations, which is the project. Internalizing the need to appease and be close to the strong man leader as a way to stay safe and survive. Children who are born into highly patriarchal, dominating families internalize this image of the strong man, and often rather than wanting to rebel against it, they want to get close to it. They want to kiss the ring. They want to vote for the dictator, because it makes them feel safe and it is familiar, and it gives them a feeling like things are in order and someone's taking care of it. So the creation of the enemy, Carl Schmitt, who Timothy Snyder calls one of the smartest fascists, which I think is rife with irony and deliciously funny. Carl Schmitt, essentially, his most famous work talks about the concept of the political as fundamentally having its roots in the definition of friend and enemy, that politics begins with the definition of the enemy. So I think that's really worth reflecting on in terms of how we've internalized domination systems and how we've made enemies of parts of ourselves that weren't acceptable, or that we were taught weren't acceptable at an early age. Jason Stanley on the techniques of fascism. The key thing is that fascist politics is about identifying enemies, appealing to the in-group, usually the majority group, and smashing truth and replacing it with power. I think all of us can recognize these patterns, as a lot of what's been happening around us in my entire adult life, frankly, but especially in recent years. So recognizing the politics of creating the enemy is really important for identifying and resisting domination systems. Now, mind you, as somebody whose social circle mainly identifies as progressive, I see the same pattern happening there. I see contemptuousness and dehumanization happening there. Progressives are not innocent of this. I think that's probably why Jordan Peterson is more worried about left-leaning authoritarianism than right-leaning authoritarianism. I don't think he's correct in that right now, but he's a very smart man and he studied these things. And Riane says over and over, left, right, northern, southern, eastern, western, it doesn't matter. What matters is this a system that orients to the domination or the partnership side of the social scale? And whether the politics are left or right really doesn't matter. And one of the things that we can always be on the alert for in our own social systems is when we hear people we know and love creating the enemy and using language of contempt and dehumanization. Because the more that's socially acceptable, the closer we are to countenancing new genocides. That's just how it works. Not to mention countenancing the current ones. So domination-oriented family relations are directly correlated with authoritarian-leaning politics later in life. This is conclusive. We know that domination-oriented family systems lead to a trend. Now, this is obviously not going to speak to everybody. Some people rebel, some people don't go for that, but it plants a deep seed. And for example, some people who might have loved the authoritarian leader in their family might have thought they were rebelling by, say, joining a new religious movement, but then they fall under the power of yet another authoritarian figure, but in the form of a spiritual leader. That's another way that kind of thing can happen. And so also just coming back to the Holocaust for a minute, we've learned that the rescuers, the people who risked their lives and their families' lives to rescue Jews, Riane will mention that they came from more partnership-oriented systems, more partnership-oriented family lives. And Snyder mentions also that they were outsiders. So if it was a church organization that was never actually part of the dominant culture, that they were always the outsiders, they were more likely to rescue Jews. If it was a population of a minority population, a Romani population, or some other group of people that had a very small number in whatever country it was, they were more likely to rescue Jews. So there's also this element of the outsider and being an outsider that creates more of a sense of compassion and creates more of a sense of, well, I just had to, that's what I had to do, which is what a lot of them said. Domination systems are trauma factories. This is another direct quote, but let's talk a little bit about what that means. Symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now the difference, so we're going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and complex trauma very briefly, but essentially the difference is in terms of how we diagnose it and in terms of how we conceptualize it, that PTSD is the result of an intense episodic trauma, something that happened and is over. Complex PTSD is the result of something that happened chronically for a period of time. So that's where we get after effects of childhood sexual abuse, or after effects of other forms of childhood abuse, after effects of domestic violence. It's not that he beat you to hell one time, it's that he beat you every night and maybe raped you. And that leads to a kind of complex trauma that is distinct diagnostically from PTSD. A lot of people are advocating for CPTSD to be a recognized diagnostic category. It's been a strangely long fight, but more and more practitioners are recognizing it as a category of experience, and that's certainly something. PTSD symptoms, most of them are re-experiencing, so nightmares and flashbacks, pervasive sense of threat, unsafety, the need for hypervigilance, and avoidance. A lot of energy is spent to avoid triggers of those flashbacks and of those re-experiencing things. So obviously the usual story is the Vietnam vet comes back home, the war is over there, or the war is over, but the war is still going on in their head, right? And they can't escape the war in their head. Whereas a situation of complex trauma is going to be more like those triggers are still there. Excuse me one second. So, you know, hearing your partner's motorcycle pulling into the driveway might trigger a trauma response, and it's happening every day. And it's happening over and over. Or in the case of a child, hearing your father come home from work. Excuse me. So symptoms of complex trauma. You can also have the other PTSD symptoms, but these are the ones more related to complex trauma. Low self-esteem, self-blame, feeling of worthlessness, learned helplessness, so a feeling of like, there's nothing I can do. Emotional dysregulation, so extreme difficulty staying regulated emotionally, maybe emotional outbursts or tendencies to extreme expression and then numbing and dullness. Also a sense of fogginess or dissociation. So we talked about, for some people, the flight response is big in their trauma experience. Leaving the body is a way that they gained some sense of safety for a long time, but that can lead to a chronic tendency toward dissociation or escapism. And then relationship troubles. Obviously, if you were chronically abused at a sensitive time in your life, you're going to have a really hard time trusting other people or knowing who is worthy of trust. Developing trusting bonds and believing in them, having faith that those bonds mean something and that you're not just going to get hurt again. And then also, you know, not every relationship that's successful stays forever. So then the ability to accept that something ended and maybe it wasn't your fault. So it comes back to that self-blame problem. The tendency to repeat earlier patterns of staying with an abuser or seeking out what feels familiar. Also of note, I think it's worth noting that a domination system can also create the cycles of grandiosity and despair. Alice Miller talks about this in The Drama of the Gifted Child. So also, or the creation of an idealized self-image. I'm coming back to Karen Horney for that. And gravitation toward a fantasy life. So a lot of people really wonder, how do all these narcissists get that way? This is part of how they get that way. obviously there's not one way to become like that. There's predispositions and all of that. But if you experienced a lot of unsafety and a lack of trust, nurturance, and caring in your early life, a lot of people end up creating an idealized self-image that would then get, if not the love and care, then certainly the fear and respect that they want so badly. And then they will live the rest of their lives trying to make that idealized self-image what the world reflects back to them. So the symptoms of trauma are also maintaining factors for domination systems. Being unable to form trusting bonds prevents many kinds of political and social action, or the formation of a healthy family life in which a new generation can be nurtured into partnerism as a way of life. Learned helplessness prevents activism. Fear of reprisal prevents activism. I can't tell you how many women I've talked to who say they were burned as a witch in a past life, and that's why they're scared right now. Genetic memory, right? This is real, and it's very real for people. And maybe, we can find all sorts of reasons. If you don't believe in reincarnation, there's still this pervasive sense of, not too long ago, women were murdered for less. Loss of voice creates a disconnection between the internal perception and the self in the world, right? So the less you are able to speak your reality, the less your reality exists, and the less you feel like a real person. There's a gradual loss of self in the muting of voice. So knowing your truth becomes more and more difficult as you fail to give voice to your perceptions and responses, mostly out of fear of rejection or reprisal of some kind. And then we have repetition compulsion. It's in my mind, this is my take on it, but it's a form of seeking safety in the familiar, performing your known role to avoid punishment or loss of connection. So back to sex, which is kind of what we promised on the tin. We could do this for weeks, but as we've discussed, a lot of these movements of revolution and liberation came with them, had with them in them the seeds of a domination regression. So obviously, when I'm working with younger women and I see the ways in which sexual liberation has essentially betrayed them and made them fear saying no to sex that they don't want, that's one of the ways in which being free to have sex has actually become a new source of coercion in these young women's lives. And I worked in a high school for my pre-doc internship, and I saw a lot of that. So sex as performance or self-objectification, we're coming back from that alienation from the body. If you see yourself essentially as an object, and you see your sexuality as something you perform to give someone else pleasure, you are already out of the experience. There's women who literally have a hard time easing into the moment and enjoying sex with a partner because they're not sure how they look right now, or they're not sure if their stomach's hanging out, or if their double chin is showing, or if they look wrinkly in this light. There's an enormous amount of anxiety and paranoia that comes with self-objectification and the sense of sex as a performance that you get applause for at the end. Maybe you get your reward at the end, but you don't enjoy it while it's happening because you're just not actually in the moment. You're entirely focused on the other person and how they're seeing you and how they're experiencing you. Riane actually has a great book. Her dissertation research was interviewing women about this idea of sex as performance, and I recommend it as a read. It's really good. So then coming more to how we've coded the male sexuality in a domination system, scoring and conquest becomes the source of pleasure rather than the genuine connection with another person. There's an alienation from intimacy. The pleasure that we see in a lot of pornography right now really comes down to degradation and humiliation. So that comes back to this question about sex work, right? Is this person being degraded and humiliated as part of their job? And are they enjoying that as role play, or is it really happening? That's another question to ask. So this is what I mean about all of these things being maintaining factors, is that the touch that could help us heal and access states of trance, access healing, access other forms of consciousness, access our sense of the divine, access wonder and awe, those those states become less available as even touch becomes a source of harm or a place of judgment and self-objectification. So as we self-objectify and seek domination-oriented rewards from sex, like social status, simple release of tension, the weaponization of desire, which we can come back to, if that's where we're leaning in our sexuality, we're getting further and further away from the kind of sex that can heal and transcend and transform a society. So also briefly, Riane talks about the so-called rape fantasies, which is actually just essentially an oxymoron, because if you're fantasizing about it, you're in control. So it can't actually be a rape fantasy. But besides that, when women were actually interviewed about the essence of these fantasies for them, and about half of American women have admitted to having fantasies of being sexually assaulted and then really getting off on it, that it's part of their masturbatory routine, or it's something that has excited them in the past. And that's a lot of women. And those are the women who will admit to it. So we can imagine it might be more. But that it's actually an expression of power, that their own sexual magnetism drove a man out of his mind with desire. It has very little to do with the pain and the humiliation and the degradation, and more to do with the sense of that weaponization of desire, that I can get whatever I want and I'm so sexy you can't resist it. That was kind of more where they were at. But of course, it was pathologized and used to validate a domination way of thinking. This idea that women just really want to be dominated. They want to be raped. They like it. So obviously, when you actually talk to the women, there's something else that comes up. And a big core of my research has been the medicalization of sex, coming back to sex as performance as well, sex as role fulfillment. I mean, there's dozens of reasons that people have sex, and I think it's great. I encourage it. But one of the things that we can actually notice is that the biomedical view of sexuality and sexual desire is really failing when it comes to creating medicines for people to help them solve this so-called dysfunction. So when we look at everything through a biomedical lens and we can't find a pill to fix what we say is a problem, that's an indication that the biomedical lens is not sufficient to define what's actually happening, right? So we see this with both men and women. When Viagra became a $1 billion blockbuster sale for Pfizer, all of these pharmaceutical companies started pouring millions into research and development to try to find a female Viagra. They have failed, essentially. 1 or 2 drugs have been approved, but people are not getting positive responses. It's not giving them what they want. Similarly, the refill rates for Viagra prescriptions are shockingly low. And what we've learned is that just because you can have an erection, it doesn't make you want sex. And unfortunately, men are kind of taught from the beginning that their erection is their sex. And so they think, if I could just get an erection again, I'd have sex again. And then they get an erection and the desire isn't there and they don't refill the prescription. So this is an article I came across very recently. It takes a different view of why women might want less sex, and how and this is specifically in heterosexual relationships, right? So we're specifically looking at that. But this theory postulates that gender differences create a discrepancy in sexual desire, that it's not that we're just biologically wired to want less sex than men, but that heteronormativity, expressing itself through inequitable division of labor, expecting a female partner to also fulfill a mother role to the male partner, objectification of women, and gender norms about sexual initiation all lead to lower sexual desire. Worth a deeper read, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And I said at the bottom, now that we've studied the domination system in depth, what do all of these hypothesized contributing factors to low sexual desire in women have in common? They're all part of a domination system. Okay, so you guys, I prepared something special for you, and we're going to go through it and then have a little bit of time for group discussion, and then I have to let you go. So those of you who want to participate, feel free to turn off your cameras, close your eyes, and we're going to do just a little bit of a guided image tour of your inner world. If you don't want to participate, or if you get uncomfortable, or if something gets triggered, or if something doesn't feel right, just gently come out. Do not force yourself to do anything that doesn't feel right to you. You are your own best healer, and I'm just here making suggestions. So, changing the pace. Okay. This is an exercise I invented called an encounter with the inner fascist, meeting the inner fascist. And I honestly think at this point, we probably all have at least one. So, remembering that fascism, as defined by Carl Schmitt, can be considered as a form of politics that begins with the definition of the enemy. So we're going to take a little bit from one of our brave contributors' ideas and just check in with your body as a friend. Just taking a minute to sink in to the feeling of embodiment, to greet your body, to welcome your body. To arrive as a friend to your body. Now I want you to imagine that right in front of you is a glimmering, shimmering curtain. It's almost transparent. It sparkles, it flows. It's deeply alluring. This is the curtain of time. And when you pass through this curtain, you might find yourself at any point in your life. We're not going to invite traumatic re-experiencing of anything. You are safe, you are whole, you are an adult. But anywhere this curtain might take you, just treat it with some curiosity. Observe. If you have a pad and paper and you want to take a couple of notes of what occurs to you, feel free to do that. And if you're able to, I recommend even standing up and approaching this curtain of time and using your hands to slowly part the curtain. And you're going to ask yourself, when was the first time I was ever aware of an enemy within myself? When was the first time I was aware that I might have an enemy inside me? Something I have to be afraid of, something I have to control. When did that first happen? What do I remember? And as you peek through the curtain of time, go ahead and walk through and see whatever it is that your life and your memory are showing you right now. How did you know it was an enemy? Who told you it was wrong to be that way? How did they tell you? Is there a trauma related to this memory? If so, like I said before, feel free to come out of the exercise or open your eyes. Gently stretch, make sure you feel safe. Tread lightly, but continue if it feels right. Going back into this time in your life, what did you do in response to this enemy once you became aware of it? What strategies did you develop to keep it under control or out of the sight of others? What were the costs of your control strategies? Can you see yourself? Now that you're older, do you have another way of looking at this aspect of yourself or your behavior with more kindness and compassion? Turning back to the curtain, ask yourself, have I learned what I needed to learn from what my life is showing me right now? Feel free to give your younger self a gift or a hug or a high five. And come forward in time. How long did you remain at war with this enemy? Are you still at war with this enemy? Do you notice other enemies inside yourself? Parts of your being you react to with the urge to punish, control, or otherwise neutralize? How do you feel in your body as you engage with those questions? Is there a tension anywhere? Check in with your throat, your chest and hands, your stomach, your pelvis, your legs and your feet. Is there tension anywhere? Any other kind of sensation? Does any part of your body feel like an enemy? Notice that. Notice how it feels to notice that. Open up to those feelings as much as is appropriate and safe for you right now. And we're going to slowly come back through the curtain, coming back to the group and asking ourselves, are you aware of a harsh voice in your mind or a desire to escape and distract yourself? Distraction might be okay. Maybe that's enough for today. You have to decide what's safe and good for you right now. But if you want to keep going, try responding to that voice or those feelings or the tension in your body. Let it know you come in peace. Tell it, if it's true, that you're grateful for all the years you tried to stay safe by dominating yourself in this way, but you're ready now to try a new form of self-government, something more like democracy. Listen to what they say. If that inner fascist starts freaking out, just let them know they'll still have a vote. They still get to participate. They just won't be in charge anymore. And we're going to try something new. Ask them if they're ready to be part of something new, something more fun, something more pleasurable, and hear what they say. After you've heard them, say thank you, if you want to. I'm glad we can finally be honest with each other. I have to go back to my class in a minute, but I'm sure we can continue this conversation. I want us to heal and find a better way to be in this body together. If you don't want to do that, then I invite you to leave. See what they do. Feel free to take a minute for yourself. Come back through the curtain, greet your body again. You can go ahead and give yourself some light touch if you like. Greet yourself as a friend. And when you're ready, come on back. And I want to say that I did get the feedback that we did that too quickly, but unfortunately, we had a lot to say earlier in the class, so I still wanted to get through this. Does anyone have anything they want to share about that?
Sure. It's I love the concept. Super love the concept, and love that idea of the, the partnership way inside. So the way that I also practice very similar, every part of me is welcome. Every anger, every rage, every manipulation, every selfishness is actually welcomed and dialogued with and go back to an originating memory. And I found it super helpful. So conceptually, like super brilliant. And I tried to take notes because I thought the outline was really gorgeous.
And I do apologize for running through it so quickly, but I just wanted to make sure we at least got a taste of it. Anyone else pretty quickly? We only have a couple more minutes.
I'm reading Why Does Patriarchy Persist? And she is
Carol
talking
Gilligan,
about, talking about the resistance. And I'm always hosanning Gilligan and saying, thank you. So there's the protest from Bowlby and the phase of protest. And when that is mortified, then it goes into depletion and misery and and detachment. And so there I was saying to this part of me, well, okay, and if you can't get on board with that, please leave. I just tried it. I said, make me.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's not, that's not going to work for me. 'Cause
They don't give up easy, but
no.
as
But I'm
as
just going to have
as
to
power is, yeah, as
I'm
power
gonna
is
have to,
structured internally, they realize that they don't actually get to control you anymore, and
right.
they either leave or they learn to value their vote.
That's what I'm going to have to work with, is value your vote.
There you go.
And
I
it
don't
was,
actually, personally, I think with these parts that we've developed, the goal is not to get them to leave. The goal is to reincorporate them into a more democratic interior world. So the invitation is that they can go, but the expectation is not that they will go. All right, so I'm just going to share the screen one more time and try to send you guys off closer to on time. So yes, and also again, feedback, we're going to share my email, feedback on that. Content and process, especially because I lost track of time a little bit in the group conversation because it was so interesting. What will you do to cultivate more pleasure in your life going forward? Just put a few ideas out. I also wanted to share the Sacred Pleasure Amazon affiliate link. They recently set this up. If you want to support the work for the center, the work of the Center for Partnership Systems, they could really use your help right now. They are definitely trying to increase and diversify their sources for funding. They're struggling a little bit right now, to be honest. So if you feel like making a charitable contribution, that is very welcome. You can also make them, excuse me, the designated recipient of a portion of your Amazon purchases by going to smile.amazon.com. And also just say thank you at some point. You know, they like being encouraged. But yeah, so this is the Amazon affiliate link. Go ahead and copy that. We can also send that up in a follow-up email if you want to buy Sacred Pleasure for yourself or a friend. If you do it through this, they get a portion of the proceeds. And thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, and we can turn off the video. And for those of you who want my contact info, I'll be glad to share that.
Thank you, Ponder. This was just so wonderful, so brilliant. You are, as far as I'm concerned, we should just confer your degree right now.
That would be great.
After all, you are a tenured professor at the Charter Cultural Center University. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Ponder, for giving us so much to think about and chew over, and different ways of not only thinking, but feeling into our lives and what we want, and how we can enrich our lives. I mean, that is one of the greatest gifts anybody can give another person. So you really have, you really have changed people's lives. I can say personally, you've changed my life through what you did. So bless you. Thank you, everybody. It's just been a delight to be with you. And sign up for our mailing list, because we're going to put out information about when Ponder will be back teaching some more really fascinating material for us. Does anybody need anything before we go? It's kind of sad to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And just some
Well-
links, you know, Ponder's email.
I put my email in the chat. I also
It doesn't, I don't see it.
oh, sorry, I accidentally sent it to the waiting room where there is no one. So sorry, one second.
They're waiting
And
for
then the link to Riane Eisler's group as well, the Leadership Institute, or I'm saying it wrong, but
Center for Partnership
thank you.
Studies. Yeah. You know, the world is just, it's such a hard place right now, and things are so difficult. So again, and I feel this way about our 1619 project conversations too. It's just, I feel like we're learning things, we're going to incorporate them into our own lives, and we're putting out a different kind of energy into the world. I think that's very, very powerful. So it's not just intellectual pursuit, and it certainly was body centered, but it even transcends that. It's about changing our, you know, I wouldn't say changing ourselves, but integrating our experiences in into our lives in a different kind of way. And I think that it really has an impact on the world beyond just our personal relationships. So, so thank you, everybody. Ponder. I could never thank you enough, really. Blessings to you all. Blessings. And thank you for being here for these wonderful discussions. Take good care.
Thank you very much for
Until
all.
next time.
Mhm.
Thank you,
Hope to
thank
see
you,
you on
thank you.
Tuesday. I hope to see you Tuesday for the 1619 project. Bye.